Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and joining me tonight is Fraser Wilson. Fraser, how are you tonight?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you, Kenny. How are you?
I'm not bad at all.
Good.
Thank you again for joining us. So our first story tonight is the meeting that happened today in Westminster between all of the opposition leaders to discuss stopping Boris Johnson's government from shutting down democracy. This was Ian Blackford today met with leaders from Labour, Plaid Cymru, the Greens, the Lib Dems and Change UK. And they came out and said basically that the parties needed to work together to use every mechanism possible to prevent a no-deal Brexit. Ian Blackford said this was a positive and productive meeting with opposition leaders committing to work together effectively to prevent a catastrophic no-deal. With no mandate or majority, the numbers are stacking up against Boris Johnson and his extreme Brexit. The possibility of stopping Brexit is real and must be realised. He also added, Scotland has been completely ignored by Westminster throughout the Brexit process. Our interests have been sidelined and we have been treated with contempt. Brexit has shown beyond doubt that Scotland will never be treated as an equal partner in the UK, and it's now clearer than ever that the only way to properly protect Scotland's interests is to become an equal and independent European country, and the people of Scotland will get the chance to choose their future in a fresh referendum. Now, the leaders also signed what is now called the Church House Declaration, which said, shutting down Parliament would be an undemocratic outrage at such a crucial moment for our country and a historic constitutional crisis. Any attempt to prevent Parliament sitting to force through a no-deal Brexit will be met by strong and widespread democratic resistance. We pledge to work together across parties and across our nations to do whatever is necessary to ensure that the people's voice is able to be heard. And so far, 160 MPs have signed that, including, as I said, members of all of those opposition parties. So, it is, I suppose, at least positive that the opposition parties are now talking to each other and hopefully developing some sort of strategy. What do you make of this announcement today then, Fraser?
I feel like it's at least some progress. It's been sort of moved forward, seeing all of the leaders sort of coming together and sort of taking this matter seriously, I'd say, rather than sort of maybe not speaking to each other. Like, it's good to see Joan Swinson's finally sort of coming on board to having dialogue with Jeremy Corbyn, at least. But I think it's just incredible. It's like we can sometimes maybe lose sight of sort of what is going on here and we get bogged down in all the details of Brexit. But this is a Prime Minister who was elected by 80,000 people in the Conservative leadership contest. That's out of a country of 60 odd million people. This Prime Minister has no mandate to be Prime Minister anyway, let alone to stop Parliament from going around its day-to-day business to push through a no-deal Brexit that nobody voted for. That was not on the ballot paper in 2016, and it's important that we sort of work together to do everything that we can to sort of make sure that the cataclysm that is no deal does not come to pass. Like, you can look at so many different sort of possibilities of what could happen for no-deal Brexit. You've got the man in the street who can't get his insulin, for example, or the family who can't visit each other over the Irish border, or the pensioners who've moved abroad that now don't have the same rights that they do in the EU. They now have to move back here and use the NHS. That'll be quite a significant sort of strain in the NHS when already it is going to lose a lot of nurses and doctors that come from EU countries. And you could go on and on with that list of sort of this is the reality of a no-deal Brexit, and to see us sort of being taken down that route is terrifying.
Yeah. Now, of course, there are still significant tensions between the opposition parties. Jo Swinson, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, said, even after agreeing this declaration, agreeing to work with the other parties, said that Corbyn should drop the idea of trying to become a caretaker Prime Minister if a no confidence vote passes. She said, I think we are less likely to win that vote of no confidence if there is the prospect of Jeremy Corbyn becoming Prime Minister, which, as we said, is very possibly true, but does show that there is not necessarily a very clear way forward. What do you think might be a way that this can work, or is that way above your pay grade?
I'm not entirely sure sort of how it could work. I don't know who you would sort of nominate to be a sort of caretaker prime minister in Jeremy Corbyn's place. Obviously, he is the leader of the opposition, and you can see why he's the sort of option that they've got for sort of forming an alternative government. But I understand that many people sort of have grievances with Jeremy Corbyn for a number of reasons. Some sort of justified, some not so justified. I think he's certainly disappointed me in sort of in the last couple of years with his sort of incompetence to sort of provide a sort of suitable opposition to a Tory government, a Conservative party that hasn't been in such disarray in decades, I would say. But yeah, as to who could be the sort of caretaker prime minister ahead of that, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's quite challenging. Obviously, there are strong voices in the Labour Party and in the Liberal Democrats against doing any sort of agreement with the SNP, because the SNP is obviously looking beyond Brexit towards independence, albeit they are very keen to prevent a no deal Brexit because of the damage that would do even to an independent Scotland. So it is a real challenge. Meanwhile, on the other side of the debate, Nigel Farage today said that he would be willing to offer some sort of electoral pact with the Tories if it would mean getting the kind of Brexit that he wants. He said we would put country before party, and we would do it every time. We would be prepared in these circumstances to help him, to work with him, perhaps, I don't know, in the form of a non-aggression pact at the election. He also said the withdrawal agreement is not Brexit. The withdrawal agreement is a betrayal of what 17.4 million people voted for. And if you go with the withdrawal agreement, we will fight you in every single seat up and down the length and breadth of the UK. As you said a minute ago, a no deal was not what people voted for.
No deal was not mentioned.
Yeah, there were
in the referendum campaign. It was that was never going to be the case. It was going to be that we would vote to leave, and the British exceptionalism would mean that we would get a deal that we would want that would be beneficial to us because we're Britain and the EU would need to have a sort of deal with us, and it sort of has transpired that the EU don't need us as much as as the politicians maybe thought that the EU needed the UK, and that it sort of meant that no deal is now sort of the option that we've got.
Yeah, there were numerous politicians on the Leave side of the debate who specifically said, well, we're not talking about leaving the single market, we're just talking about leaving the political institutions.
Nigel Farage himself talked about having a Norway-style arrangement with the EU.
Which is essentially very similar to what the withdrawal agreement says.
Exactly.
But it does seem like he's leaning far more towards what he calls a clean break Brexit, which, it does seem like it's going to be anything but clean. He's also one of the ones who has repeatedly used this phrase, the undemocratic Irish backstop, which is a kind of an extraordinary thing to describe it as, given that that's an international peace agreement that was negotiated between a whole host of parties. And
the Brexiteers have sort of, especially in the last week or so, there's been numerous instances of them saying something that sort of makes you question what knowledge, if any, do they have of British-Irish history. It's like the idea that Boris Johnson said last week that Ireland could leave the customs union or the single market alongside the UK on an interim basis to solve the Irish backstop problem. It's like, that's ludicrous. Ireland is an independent country, and it's not going to it's not going to put itself
Yeah.
out of joint just to benefit the UK. The same with bringing police forces from the UK onto the Irish border to police that. Like, that's gonna end very badly if that's what they're looking to do.
It was said through the week that it would be particularly Scottish officers that would be sent on the basis that English officers might face more hostility from Irish people. Because, I mean, I visited Ireland quite recently, and when you visit the kind of historical sites around or talking about their independence struggle, they always refer to the battle with England. They don't refer to the battle with the UK.
So now it would sort
Britain.
of appear that England's using Scottish officers to try and solve their problem.
Yeah, and we could, because again, yes, this was not a problem that Scotland created, not something that Scotland wanted.
Exactly.
So this is and the other thing is this idea of suspending Parliament. There's this idea that in order to fulfill the democratic will of the British people as expressed in the referendum, that we're going to suspend democracy in order to make that happen. Is this just what we need to expect from what we laughably call British democracy now?
I mean, they're suspending Parliament so that they can deliver a Brexit which was designed to bring back parliamentary supremacy to the UK Parliament. And now they're suspending that very Parliament to push it through. So it is a very sort of strange sort of logic that the Brexiteers are following.
Yeah.
Almost makes you think that democracy is not what their end goal is.
Yeah. And at the same time, we're hearing that Boris Johnson has got a short list of loyalists. Not capital L loyalists, people loyal to him.
Brexiteer loyalists.
Although they may well be loyalists with a capital L, who are, he's trying to get them into the Lords. There's also Theresa May's resignation honours list, which is a baffling concept to me. She's expected to elevate a number of people to Lords, including Gavin Barwell, who former MP, lost his seat, was then appointed her Chief of Staff, and now may be elevated to Lords and made a legislator in perpetuity.
Okay.
This is something we were talking about before the show, about just how messy the entire British system is. That we have this enormous unelected legislature. It's one of only a tiny handful of unelected legislatures anywhere in the world.
I think we'd do well to sort of take a step back from all of this and consider British politics right now as if we were looking at it from afar. So let's say we're looking at an African country, for example, that has voted to leave the African Union, and now we're looking at their elected leader is wanting to just cut all ties with the African Union straight away and just shut down Parliament and push that through. And then, in addition to that, there is an unelected chamber where people who have sort of been loyal to those that are in power can then be made a member of the higher chamber in that country's parliament. And just imagining how how Western media would sort of portray something like that against sort of how the media is portraying the UK as it is currently. It's just, consider if the UK was an African country or a South American country or a country where you sort of would consider this to be less moral, I'd say. It's like, why is it sort of a different case within the UK when we see clear undemocratic processes play in front of our very eyes?
We do have a significant dysfunction in this country. Is there any way forward, do you think, for Britain at this stage that isn't going to cause some sort of disaster?
It seems like we're sort of a bit beyond the point of no return almost, because if you have a second referendum, or if Brexit doesn't happen, then there are going to be people who are going to riot as a result of that, because they felt that their vote has not been heard and that Brexit has not been delivered. Whereas on the other hand, you've got if this goes through, if Brexit and no deal Brexit goes through, then people are going to die as a result of that. There's already people that are having to use food banks just now. Imagine how more difficult it's going to be when there are food shortages anyway. Where's the food for the food banks going to come from if there's already a mass food shortage as a result of there not being any sort of legislation with the EU overnight?
Yeah. I know somebody who works for one of the major supermarkets who said that we've got 3 days after a no-deal Brexit before all the shelves are empty. And he's not someone prone to scaremongering or to kind of alarmism, but he's genuinely very concerned.
This is the thing, a lot of it gets dismissed as scaremongering when it is just sort of like, this is fact, this is where we're going to go. So many things so many like minuscule sort of things that you just consider part of day-to-day life and sort of being a part of the EU, if they're severed overnight, then the sort of consequences of that are sort of limitless.
Yeah. So there's even discussion. This was quite appealed to me in a very morbid way. In a foreword to a new edition of the Ministerial Code that was published last week, Boris Johnson insisted there must be no misuse of process or procedure by any individual minister that would seek to stall the collective decisions necessary to deliver Brexit and secure the wider changes needed across our United Kingdom. So this is a code of ethics,
do as I say,
theoretically, for ministers, which specifically says you have to do my policy or there's going to be trouble. It's very difficult, I think, to talk about this because, as you say, if this were any other country, you would look at it and say, "Oh dear God, maybe we should intervene here. Maybe we need another."
Yeah, America could be talking about regime change if we were somewhere less sort of. If we were in South America, for example, there would be quite a lot of people in America saying, "No, you can't do that," and sort of calling for a regime change. But because we're the United Kingdom and we're sort of have this sort of unearned reputation, I'd say, for being sort of beacons of sort of democracy and the sort of Westminster system of parliaments and stuff, we're an incredibly undemocratic country, especially if we're made up of 4 countries and one country can sort of outnumber the other 3 countries whenever it wants.
I mean, something I heard, and you see this in the European media if you ever look at them. A number of countries, particularly in Germany, I've got some friends there who said, well, what happened to Britain? There was always this feeling about Britain that Britain was sober and sensible and kind of pragmatic and didn't do kind of wild kind of extremism. It was always quite sensible and conservative with a small c.
I don't know, you could argue that austerity happened to Britain. Austerity happened sort of about 9-10 years ago now, and as a result people have found it so much harder to sort of find work, not to find work, but to find work that they can live off of, and are continuing to live in poverty whilst they're in work. And then if you've got a government and you've got sort of media and reality TV shows that are sort of telling you that it is the fault of people who are scrounging benefits, it is the fault of people who are migrating here, and I think there's a lot of pent-up anger that no one really has sort of gave any answers for years now. Like Labour under Ed Miliband in 2015 were essentially a carbon copy of the Conservative Party. They weren't really a sort of leftist party that sort of offered an alternative. It was just still austerity, but slightly less. And I think you've sort of now, this has come to the fray where these people have finally sort of found a voice it's a cry out for help, really, I think. It's just sort of, it is misplaced in terms of where they think the problems that are facing this country lie, and it's just a shame to see so many people fall into sort of xenophobia and sort of fear of sort of immigrants coming and taking their jobs, and that is why they're struggling with where they are, when it is reality, it is a government that doesn't care about you.
Mm-hmm. We had a discussion on the show on Sunday about a very different subject, but one of the things that we were talking about was the idea that you need an emotional narrative around things rather than just facts. Facts are not necessarily going to facts are not necessarily going to convert people. That what you need is an emotional story that connects with people. So what we need is some new story to tell. And one of the things I've suggested is that we could that in Scotland we have this narrative where our nationalism is civic and inclusive and outward looking, and that we have an opponent, which is Westminster, and that's who we consider responsible for many of the issues that we have. Whereas in England, the other has been Europe for decades now, really, as far as a good bulk of the Tory party goes. Whereas and there's no kind of countervailing narrative. Jeremy Corbyn is, I think, trying to say, it's rich people, that's who's causing all the problems, but at the same time he thinks that the EU is bankers and oligarchs and stuff, and he has a very ambiguous, shall we say, relationship with the EU.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any way that we in Scotland, or at least in the kind of the progressive side of Scotland, is there any way that we can help change that narrative for England, do you think? Or are we now one of the others that the English people and English political parties look on as one of the enemies that have to be fought off?
I don't know. I don't think that England sort of has more of a problem with sort of this idea of sort of othering than we do in Scotland. I think it's just that they've not got the same sort of options that we've got to vote in this country. You've seen countless people like on Twitter and stuff asking if they can join the SNP when they're in England, or like saying, after a TV debate scene, I wish I could vote for Nicola Sturgeon down south in England. I think it is just sort of, it's not having a vehicle to sort of chase that sort of support, and I think sort of that's why, I don't know, a lot of people have got these frustrations in sort of the north of England, the post-industrial areas, where they've not had a sort of option that sort of speaks to them about how their life can be made better. Labour let them down quite a lot in the sort of earlier part of this decade. The Lib Dems as well, particularly, had just sort of being the handmaidens essentially to Tory austerity and to Brexit, you could argue. I don't know, I'd like to hope that Scotland wouldn't be sort of othered in that same way if there were independence here. I'd certainly like to think so. Certainly from the amount of people I know who are English that have moved up to Scotland, like sort of around my age, sort of coming up for university or wherever, and sort of coming up to Scotland, not really sort of knowing much about Scotland. Maybe they haven't visited here before, certainly don't know much about the politics, but the amount of people that I know now that have lived here for a long time and saying that I now feel that this is my home and that I would rather sort of stay here than move back down south to England. It's like, I think we can still get on very, very well just as partners, rather than being in this sort of very strange sort of relationship where one can sort of veto the other's sort of wishes and desires without sort of any sort of conversation about it.
On that note, in other news today, the Scottish Government published an action plan including a remit for the new citizens' assemblies. These citizens' assemblies are supposed to figure out what Scotland is going to look like in the future. The the remit's to consider what kind of country we are seeking to build, how best we can overcome the challenges Scotland and the world face in the 21st century, including those arising from Brexit, and what further work should be carried out to give us the information we need to make informed choices about the future of the country. Constitutional Relations Secretary Mike Russell said, "This remit creates the framework within which the Assembly will operate and provides a new way for Scotland's future to be debated in an impartial, open way, free from political interference and vested interests. I hope that that in turn sparks a wider national conversation. But it shouldn't stop there. It is important that Assembly members know the Government and the Parliament are listening, and that the Assembly's recommendations also inform our policy decisions. The remit spells out how this will happen, ensuring a central role for Parliament and committing Government to action within 90 days of the Assembly submitting its report." So this is these meetings will start just before what we believe is now going to be Brexit Day, so the weekend of 26th and 27th of October. And it will meet over 6 weekends between then and the end of April. What are your hopes for the Citizens' Assembly?
Well, I've got quite high hopes for the Citizens' Assembly. I think it is sort of like the antithesis to the House of Lords, and that it is just ordinary people picked at random from the street that can actually go in and sort of have an impact on sort of where we want our country to go. I've got like some family and friends who are sort of apolitical, I guess, or not apolitical, but they just feel that all politicians are the same. All politicians are sort of liars. All politicians are only in politics for their own interests and stuff. And then like seeing Scotland doing something like this, it's like, well, if we were an independent country, we could have this Citizens' Assembly where ordinary people actually do get a say in sort of policies that affect them, and sort of they're the people who will be most informed of sort of what it is they need to sort of thrive and to prosper. And so I think the Citizens' Assembly is a great idea with such potential. I think one particular policy area where I can see a Citizens' Assembly being really productive is in drug policy. So we had the sort of news a few weeks ago where the sort of drug deaths in Scotland have gone way up, and I think sort of as a result of numerous policies being made by maybe well-meaning sort of policymakers, but who don't really sort of know sort of what drives people into drug use, what can help them with drug use. Like safe consumption units, for example, is an area where they can, like, they're not going to stop taking the drugs overnight, but you can provide them a place to sort of start that process of rehabilitation. And I think if you actually spoke to people who have been victims of sort of drug abuse before, or to the families of people who have been victims of drug abuse before, I think you would get a far healthier and better sort of drug policy come out as a result of that, because you've consulted people who actually know what it's like and know what they would have needed in that time of need, and sort of know what are the sort of societal factors that sort of contribute to people abusing drugs. Yeah,
I mean, it is quite an open remit. I think certainly the Scottish Government is hoping that there will be a move towards towards independence coming out of it.
Yeah.
The Greens, on the other hand, put out a statement saying that they think it's very important that the Citizens' Assembly discusses climate change. It does specify that it's to look at the challenges that Scotland will face in the 21st century.
So it's quite broad.
And that's clearly going to be one of them. Is there anything else? I mean, you mentioned drug policy. Is there anything else that you think could be discussed there and should be discussed there?
I think sort of like universal credit would be a good one. For example, if how Citizens' Assembly could work. I know that like sort of the benefit system for the Brent Scotland might be different, but like in the present situation, it would be good to sort of speak to people, and for people who are sort of suffering for universal credit, who are having to wait weeks and weeks, having to use food banks because they've not got money to be able to afford to feed their family that particular night. I think it would be good to sort of hear from them directly as to how this getting done, and also for them to feel like they actually have a voice. Because I think when you're sort of in that sort of level of destitution, it can be quite easy to feel sort of disenfranchised and that no one sort of can hear you anyway, and feel a little bit invisible to the world. So I think sort of for establishing a sort of greater feeling of I have a say in sort of how this society can be run, is that not just feeling, oh, it's pointless to sort of get involved anyway. That's what my hopes are for a citizens' assembly, certainly.
Yeah, I think that just the very act of consulting citizens could be a really positive thing. I think, like you say, there's such distrust in politicians, in the political process, that just saying to normal people, you get a say here. You get to contribute. You get to tell us what matters to you. I think it'll be fascinating. I think I'm really looking forward to hearing what comes out of it. I am intrigued
to see what comes out of it. So hopefully it's something we can build upon moving forward.
Yeah, the Scottish Government does seem to be quite ambitious about it. It does seem to be putting some resources into it, offering support on getting expert witnesses and things in to talk. So we will keep following this story as much as we can. We'll see what comes out of it come April when they make the report, and then within 90 days of that, Parliament is expected to take action. So a lot to look forward to. In other news, in the US, this is quite an interesting story. An Oklahoma judge yesterday ordered Johnson & Johnson to pay $572.1 million to the state for its part in fueling an opioid epidemic by deceptively marketing addictive painkillers. This was actually less than investors had been expecting, so ironically, Johnson & Johnson shares actually rose in the wake of this. The state's Attorney General had filed a lawsuit seeking $17 billion to address the impact of the drug crisis on Oklahoma, and this was kind of considered like a test case for some national legislation and for other states that are considering this. This was marketing drugs including, where is the names? Duragesic and Nucynta, painkillers that were marketed basically as being non-addictive, but as opiates, unsurprisingly, they were highly addictive. And there is now a very serious opioid epidemic in the US. There have been 400,000 overdose deaths between 1999 and 2017. Wow. And since 2000, some 6,000 just in Oklahoma have died from opioid overdoses. There's 2,500 different lawsuits have been brought by states, counties, and cities across the US seeking to hold these drug makers accountable. There was one against Purdue Pharma last year, I believe, where again what seems a relatively small price was paid in the millions, when the family that owns that company made literally billions in selling OxyContin, which they had marketed as non-addictive, and which it turns out is its nickname is hillbilly heroin, because so many people across the South, especially, have become addicted. What do we make of this about holding drug companies accountable for drug addictions?
I mean, this is such an American story, that, isn't it? Like, you see the share prices went up because the shareholder, it was less than the fine was less than what they expected it to do. It's like only in America would like something like that happen, you feel. And it's like, yeah, I don't know. We were speaking about this earlier, and it's like it's just something that could only really sort of happen in the US. Like, you wouldn't sort of see it happen in the UK so much. So it's like, if you're ill in the UK, we're blessed here to have the NHS, and of course, while it might not be sort of everything that we could possibly hope to be, we're very privileged to have it, when you consider there's 320 million people in the States who don't have a national health service like that. And it's like, when you look at, you just like, you consume American television, for example, and you see the amount of adverts where it is a medical advert and it is a drug company that are talking up this product that they've got, and it's like, ask your doctor about this product that we are trying to sell to you. Not ask your doctor about what the best medicine would be for this illness. It is ask your doctor about our product. And sort of you get the sort of comical sort of T's and C's at the end where they speak at 1,000,000 miles an hour about sort of may cause this and this and this and death and all sorts of stuff like that. So yeah, it's just another part of the United States of America that just seems very, very sort of alien and strange that this can sort of be the reality in such a developed Western country. So yeah, it's not good at all, but it is good to see that at least some of these big companies are finally being made to pay these fines for sort of the deaths that they've caused.
Yeah, and of course to bring it back to Brexit, we've heard recently Trump and Johnson talking about the potential for a big trade deal, the best trade deal in history, coming very soon after Brexit. But we have heard Trump in the past saying that the NHS would have to be on the table, that healthcare would have to be something that was open for American companies to move into. Is that do we think that this might be something that we might end up slipping into?
I was reading an analysis of like sort of how Trump sort of does diplomacy that I found quite interesting, and I can't remember the exact. I think it was something to do with South Korea or North Korea, sorry, but it was talking about how Trump will initially say something so outlandish. No, he was talking about Xi Jinping and how he's the Chinese president who's now got like a sort of lifetime presidency or something, and then Trump made an off-the-cuff remark of like, it would be great if we had something like that sort of here, and like he's just made an off-the-cuff, totally ridiculous sort of remark, but then he sort of sprinkled it again a couple of more times in like media appearances in the coming weeks and months until it sort of became like an almost more realistic prospect because it was being talked about so much more in the media. And you can say the same about Greenland as well, about Trump wants to buy Greenland. That's not a rational idea, but then it keeps getting talked about and suddenly it seems like it's more on the cards. And I think you could have the same with the sort of NHS. It's like there'll be a couple of different instances where Trump might say, we want to sort of open up the NHS to American companies and stuff like that, and we'll sort of dismiss it as no, this won't happen, and then it'll get talked about a little bit more and a little bit more, and I don't think mini-me Trump Boris Johnson has the capacity to sort of stand up to Trump for sort of, well, it's not least because we're going to be that desperate for our trade deal if no deal Brexit goes past that. I dread to think what Boris Johnson could offer up to the Trump administration to be able to get a trade deal with the United States, because we're definitely a very small fish compared to the US at the moment.
Yeah, as you say, there's a real problem there in that there is going to be desperation, I think, from the British government to just be able to say that it's achieved something, that it's got a deal after the promise of, there's going to be 50 trade deals ready to go on day one.
I remember
after Brexit.
Liam Fox talking about how great it was that we've secured a trade deal with like Fiji. And it's like, well, that's great. Like Fiji is a lovely place, I'm very sure, but like that's not going to replace 27 European countries that you're on your doorstep when Fiji is literally on the other side of the planet.
Yeah.
I think that's what we forget with like these sort of trade deals. It's like it is hard to. There's a reason why we're in a trading bloc with the countries that are close to us, because it is far harder and far more expensive to trade with countries that are much further away from you, and that seems like such a sort of elementary fact, but no one really seems to sort of give it much attention. And it's like, okay, sure, you can have a free trade deal with Fiji or New Zealand or something like that, but the costs are still going to be higher because the logistical costs of it are far greater. Whereas we've got 27 wealthy countries on our doorstep that we're not wanting to do trade with anymore. It's bizarre.
Yeah, and it does seem we've obviously seen a lot of quite strong language from the EU saying, we're not necessarily in any hurry to do you any favours now. So this is, I think, is a concern. We have to look to this issue with the US. So anyway, moving on again, back to Europe. In Italy, there's been further conflict between the Five Star Movement, who are the largest party in Italy just now, and the opposition Democratic Party, after the previous government collapsed last week. There's been a disagreement over who should be the next interior minister. The Democratic Party spokesman accused the Five Star leader Luigi Di Maio of hindering talks with his request to serve as interior minister as well as deputy prime minister. Five Star sources have said that Di Maio never demanded the interior ministry. The Democratic Party is indicating it's dropped a veto on Giuseppe Conte serving another term as Prime Minister, which Five Star had wanted. But it's a very complex picture in Italy, and it does seem to be pretty chaotic. What do you know about Italian politics?
Not an awful lot, apart from the fact that it seems to be chronically sort of chaotic. It seems to be chaotic quite often. I think it's this. If there is another election, it would be the third election in as many years, and I don't know. That this might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that there's been about 50 odd Italian prime ministers within the last 50 years. So it's nothing new, really, I suppose, within Italian politics. But I don't know. I guess we've got the Five Star Movement, sort of like a populist sort of Eurosceptic party, but from a sort of different sort of standpoint, from a sort of more leftist sort of standpoint, and sort of being at loggerheads with the Democratic Party, I suppose. But yeah, I think their sort of president gave them a sort of deadline of tonight to sort of sort it out, and I think the president's extended this deadline to tomorrow to sort of see if the parties can reach an agreement and if a government can be formed to sort of continue just now until the next inevitable sort of schism arises.
Yeah, it's a really difficult situation. There's because obviously the threat is that the League, the hard right party in Italy, has been rising in the polls, and both Five Star and Democrats want above all to prevent them having any grip on power. And of course, today we heard about an Italian grounding of two planes that had been searching for migrants crossing the Mediterranean. After we've talked several times on the show about Italy's resistance to migrants landing in Italy. And obviously, if the League were to take power, then that would exacerbate that whole crisis. Again, it's a story that we will keep an eye on. We'll presumably hear something more tomorrow, and we'll see what happens. Hopefully, we can at least not see the further rise of the hard right in Europe, which is it's happening across more and more countries now. Moving on again, Norway has said, or rather the central banker who responsible for managing Norway's wealth fund has said that it should move investment to North America, saying that the rate of return and the measures of risk have been better in North America in the last few years than in the rest of the world. He declined to say how much of the value of the fund could move, but it does seem that Norway is looking at expanding further into there. Their initial plan has always been to work more with their closest trading partners. Obviously, most of those were in Europe, which was 50% of the total holdings, and that's already come down to 34%, 43% in the US now, and they're expecting that to go up. So that's an interesting story, but it shows, I think, really how well Norway has stewarded its wealth.
It kind of is like what might have been for us here in Scotland. Sort of Norway set up their oil fund. I don't know how long
About
ago?
30 years, I
30
think.
years ago, and the amount of money that sort of they've raised from it is sort of astronomical. Now you'd say it's probably it will be too late for Scotland to set up its own sort of fund if it became internet. I mean, it could, but it would also it would have to be burning far more sort of fossil fuels, and I'm not sure if that is something that we want to be doing currently when there's a climate emergency in play. But the fact that Norway has been able to do this, and with their amount of oil, and Scotland with a similar amount of oil, has not been able to. Norway has got to show for it however many different sort of social policies they've been able to fund through their fund, and also sort of plans to expand into North America. We've got food banks to show for it. We've got children in poverty. We've got a decline in life expectancy to show for the vast wealth in oil that we've got here. And we're told it's a curse on us, essentially. It's a very, very strange sort of situation.
Yeah, it's as you say, it is just a real example of what could have been. Norway, the Norwegian fund holds around 1% of all the stocks and shares in the world, which is one of the most remarkable statistics I think I've ever heard. A country of 5 million people owns 1%
of
all the world's stocks and shares.
That's incredible.
And they have this vast fund. As you say, it's something that we could have done, that the Scottish National Party tried to persuade the British government to do on a number of occasions and didn't. And again, we talked about how Britain looks from the outside. With our House of Lords and our broken democracy. The only two countries in the world that don't have the only two oil producing countries in the world that have never had a sovereign wealth fund are us and Iraq.
Right.
Which is, again, not great company to be in.
Nope.
It is a tragedy, and as you say, as we look towards the future and we think about how quickly we need to think about getting off oil completely, that fund, I would imagine, in Norway is going to be partly spent on managing the withdrawal from oil, of finding new work for those workers.
Exactly. If we'd
and making up the gap.
If we'd had an oil fund in Scotland for all that time, we could be investing that money into a Green New Deal, for example, into putting mass investment in our sort of hydroelectric capabilities or wind capabilities, solar, and sort of the amount of jobs that could be created as a result of that, and sort of like jobs that focusing into the future and helping us bring our sort of carbon footprint down to net zero, like far, far quicker than we're ever going to be able to do just now. Sort of investment and sort of radical ideas such as like sort of electric roads to sort of power your cars on, so that whilst your cars are driving along the road, they're being charged as they do it. And it's like, that's all stuff that could have been done through an oil fund, but alas, no, it's been squandered.
Yeah, it's sad to spend so much of our time kind of looking back and thinking what could have been, but I think it's worth doing occasionally just to remind ourselves just how badly run Scotland has been, just how badly managed our resources have been by a Westminster government that is just so far removed from the people that are affected. Anyway, another couple of good news stories, both from the NHS in Scotland. The first is that IVF waiting times have improved. Scotland continues to lead the way in the provision of NHS IVF treatment, and over the last 2 years, all eligible patients have started treatment within a year of referral. This is coming from Public Health Minister Joe Fitzpatrick. He said, over the past 5 years, we've invested around £28 million to reduce IVF waiting times and improve outcomes for patients. We want to make access to treatment on the NHS as fair as possible, giving more people the opportunity to conceive. And Jean Freeman today announced a pay award of 2.5% backdated to the 1st of April for medical and dental staff, general practitioners and general dental practitioners in the NHS in Scotland. She said this announcement means junior doctors working on typical rotas in Scotland can be up to £6,000 a year better off than their English equivalents. And our specialty doctors, associate specialist doctors and consultants will remain the best paid in the UK. This will help ensure that NHS Scotland remains an attractive employment option for medical and dental staff. So, as you said, we are blessed to have an NHS, and in Scotland it does seem that in some ways it's a better run NHS than we see down south. What do you make of this news?
It's very welcoming news to sort of see that waiting times are lower sort of here for IVF than they are down south as well. And again, it's like nurses and junior doctors are not paid anywhere near enough the amount that you would think they would be deserving of, considering the work that they do and the sort of pressure that they're on currently sort of as part of the NHS. So to see them sort of getting a pay rise is encouraging, and you'd hope that they would continue to sort of go in that direction, because our nurses and our junior doctors sort of do some of the sort of most important work in our society, and quite often they're not given the sort of credit or respect that they deserve for doing that. So that's encouraging news to see that there's sort of there's a pay rise kind of going up.
Yeah, I think junior doctors especially have just a ridiculously hard time. I think honestly, if I was a junior doctor, I'd be asking for a cut in the hours before I asked for a pay rise.
Some of the stories that I've heard are like quite horrific sort of stories, and especially even like speaking to people who I was at uni with who were studying nursing or like sort of medicine, sort of being like, I'm not sure, like, what am I sort of gotten myself in for essentially? And it's like a lot of them sort of considering like, I don't know if I can sort of do this, or like sort of putting a strain on their own mental health as well when they're trying to deal with so many different people who are so ill and they're crying out for help, and they can't sort of give the support that they wish they could to those sort of people, and they're getting paid nothing for it. So like, I can fully understand why some would maybe decide, I can't do this anymore, and that's the decision they have to make for themselves. But it's just it's a shame. So anything that sort of suggests that sort of pay is going up for sort of nurses, or they're able to sort of see people in a more sort of timely manner, is encouraging.
Yeah, and of course, you know, it goes back again to Brexit, the challenge of recruiting and keeping staff in the NHS is getting harder and harder, not least because of the challenges of Brexit. So hopefully a wee bit of extra money in their pockets will help some people make the decision to stay with us, because we really can't afford to lose them.
Yeah.
So, a story that you will have a little bit of an interest in as somebody from the south of Scotland. This is funding for communities and women in business in the south of Scotland, coming from the South of Scotland Economic Partnership. The partnership has awarded a total of £1,045,184 to 5 projects, including an initiative to improve Galashiels Town Centre and attract more visitors to the area. There's work on community enterprises, on developing rural skills, an incubator to help women grow their businesses, and as I said, some developments to build a better Galashiels. I mean, I'm sure the Galashiels that we have is fine. It's not like we're building a better one in Lanarkshire or something. But to improve Galashiels and to make it again a better place to do business and a better place to visit. So what do you make of this announcement?
I think quite a lot of the different initiatives that they're funding are quite good. I particularly like the Growing Rural Skills one. So that's £289,000 over 2 years. It's built upon a recent sort of investment made in the dairy sector in Dumfries and Galloway. They're extending it out to the Scottish borders as well. But it's basically sort of developing sort of talent so that there's a future sort of talent pool for people going into that sort of sector, which I think it works well for both parties. It works well for those sectors who need who are going to need more people to sort of work in agriculture, particularly if we're going to be losing so many EU migrants who predominantly do that work currently, and if we're going to have less food imported, we're going to need to grow more sort of food ourselves. So we need this, we need these skills to be developed, and that's not something that you're really going to get through sort of going to university. I think there's a little bit of a, in the last couple of decades, it's been sort of, that is sort of the end point that you need to get to, is that to be successful in life you need to go to university and get a degree and get a job. And I think that sort of resulted in almost an oversaturation of university graduates coming out of university, haven't got their degree, and now they're trying to look for a job, and it's becoming really difficult. I know really, really intelligent, smart people who are working in, have been working just in coffee shops, just to have a job. It is so difficult to find a job coming out of university. So anything that sort of encourages sort of developing skills in other areas that there is a need for work for is to be encouraged. In addition to that as well, there's the community enterprise support, so that's £500,000 that's being put into a number of different areas, I think, such as Annan, Dumfries, Jedburgh, my hometown Stranraer as well is getting some of that money. So I think these are all places that sort of need investment, and they have done for quite a long while. It sort of sometimes feels that the south of Scotland is an area that's almost, I think, forgotten a little bit by the sort of central government in Scotland, particularly. So it's encouraging to see these investments sort of being made, and it should sort of help a little the sort of progression in that part of the country and development there.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more about the rural development money. As I have a kind of other work that I do in food, and I think the average age of a farmer in Scotland just now is 59.
Really?
So, and as you say, anything that brings in new blood, brings in some new ideas, kind of diversifies farms, because it's not easy to make a living farming. And this idea of diversifying what farms are doing, including more agroforestry and all these kind of things, I think you're absolutely right. It's really essential for rural communities.
I really like so another one they've got is Retweed, which I assume is sort of based around in the Tweed sort of area. So that's £19,000 over 2 years for a business incubator to help women start and grow their businesses as well. And I think that is to be encouraged as well, is to encourage more women to sort of start up their own business and ensure they have funding for that as well, because I think the sort of business sector is still has problems with gender equality and sort of the opportunities that present themselves to women to be able to start their own business. So I think little projects like this, if they can be replicated on a wider scale, are definitely to be encouraged.
Yeah. And so just finally, today, John Finney, the Highland and Islands Green MSP, announced that he will retire at the next elections. John Finney said, "It's an honour to serve the Highlands and Islands in the Scottish Parliament, and he intends to continue working hard until his last day in office. He was involved in representative politics since he was elected as a councillor in 2007. He was elected initially as an SNP member, of course. He was one of the two who left the SNP when the SNP committed to NATO membership, and he joined the Greens, still a very committed advocate for independence and CND, and also quite a Green activist as well. So I don't know if you know John Finney at all.
He used to be one of my MSPs, I believe, when I lived up in Inverness. So I only know him a little bit through that. I sort of just knew sort of like his story. He was sort of like was part of the SNP, moved away in opposition to their name. So clearly a very principled sort of man who sort of stands by what he believes in, and I'm sure his constituents would say that he served them really well. So I guess happy retirement. I
mean, he's been a guest here on Broadcasting Scotland a couple of times, and he's always welcome to come back if he ever gets if he ever feels like he wants to just dip his toe back in the water. So we do wish John Finney the very best in his retirement. As he says, he's not retiring until the election, which we assume will be in 2021. So yeah, all the best to John Finney. That is unfortunately all we've got time for tonight. We will be back tomorrow with a new host, which will be the gentleman sitting next to me. Fraser will be taking over as host tomorrow. And I'm sure he will do a fantastic job.
Here's hoping.
In the meantime, as always, we want to remind you that it is an expensive business making TV programs. We work on a shoestring budget here, and we hope that you can't tell just how little money we get away with spending to bring you a show every day here on Broadcasting Scotland. We are doing our level best to do more. We are coming back. I'll be back on Thursday broadcasting live from a town hall event in Edinburgh with Ian Blackford and Mary Black. But again, all of these things that we do cost money. If you have any money to spare, please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register to sign up as a supporter. Your £5 a month could make all the difference to helping us to build a new media for a new Scotland. And we are also planning on developing a Scottish question time type show that's going to go around the country. We're ready to do that. We have the infrastructure in place, and we have the people ready to work on it. But we need another, I think, 300 subscribers to make it realistic for us to do that on an ongoing basis. So again, please, if you have £5 a month to spare, please do go and register. You will make all the difference to what we can achieve here at Broadcasting Scotland. But in the meantime, we will always be free to view, and we'll always keep trying to bring the very best guests, the very best hosts to you here on Broadcasting Scotland. For now, though, thank you very much for watching. I've been Kenny McBride. This was Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. Have a great night.